What's going on, Bills Mafia? Following the 2025 NFL Draft, the Bills have added 21 players to the roster. 9 in the NFL Draft and then 12 UDFAs, bringing the total number of players on the Buffalo Bills to 88 at this point. Well, we know that once the regular season rolls around, you got to get down to 53. So on today's edition of the Bills Breakdown, we're going to go through 5 Bills cut candidates and players who have been on the roster for a while now and could see their time in a Bills jersey come to an end before 2025. The projected roster cutdown day is August 26th, and the final preseason game is on the 24th of August. So it is a ways away, but is never too early to speculate on how this Bills roster will shake out for the regular season. In the 2024 NFL Draft, the Bills made 9 selections, like I said, and they started off by making a splash of a super athlete corner in the first round in Maxwell Harrison, and somebody who projects to be a day one starter for the Bills. TJ Sanders, who they traded up for in round 2, is going to, again, hopefully be a day one starter on that Bills defense. Dane Jackson is going to be a player who I expect to get a ton of burn this year on that edge spot. And then Deon Walker, who I believe to be a very big value pick for Buffalo in round 4. I mean, the early part of Buffalo's draft was amazing. And then they made some really good value picks in the second half of their draft too. Dorian Strong out of Virginia Tech, bolstering the depth in the cornerback room is going to be great. A good blocking tight end in Jackson Hayes as well. Jordan Hancock, another DB for this room that needs depth, and you can put him at safety as well. And then Chase Lunt out of UConn for some depth in the offensive line. They rounded out things with wide receiver finally. I know the WGR folks over there weren't happy that the Bills did not address receiver early on in the draft, but they go with Caden Prather in round 7 out of Maryland. I like the Bills draft class, man, and a lot of people in the general public and the media seem to have positive thoughts about it, grading it very highly. And it's a lot of the players project to be day one contributors. So, some people are going to have to see their playing time decrease, and some people might have to see their roster spot be eliminated. And then the Bills added 12 UDFAs too. And what we know from last year is that the Buffalo gives these guys opportunities. They added multiple players at the wide receiver spot, at the edge, along the defensive line, and some depth at center as well. Added 3 safeties as UDFAs too. And that's a room that we know needs depth for Buffalo right now. Could somebody end up making the 53-man roster from the group of UDFAs? The Bills have had guys had that happen before. Just last year, Buffalo Joe Andreessen, he was a rookie minicamp invite. Wasn't even a preferred UDFA on the first couple of days of those guys signing, and he ends up making the 53 come August. It was a great story, and we know that the Bills give those guys opportunities if they take advantage of them. So there's going to be opportunities for obviously the draft picks, and never know. There's some guys who get drafted late may not make the team, but there will also be opportunities for the UDFAs as well. So that means some players on the Bills roster right now need to get cut. So with that being said, we're going to get into the top 5 surprising Bills cut candidates. But first, if you think this is the year, that a Lombardi could come to the 716, hit that thumbs up icon, send the good vibes to the Buffalo Bills this year, and hopefully we get a parade. It would be insane. Hit the thumbs up icon and send the good vibes for 2025. All right, getting into the Bills cut candidates, DaQuan Jones at number 1. And yeah, I mean, with the Bills' additions to the defensive line this offseason, you could argue this is a player who's on the chopping block for Buffalo. And at age 33, he's not getting any younger at this point. The Bills need fresher legs along that defensive line, and somebody who can play the majority of snaps and get better as the season goes along. I mean, Jones, with what he's making right now, it just doesn't seem like he is going to be a featured player at the top of the Bills depth chart. I mean, you kind of think about them adding TJ Sanders, trading up for that guy, using valuable assets to go up and get him, and then adding Larry Ogunjobi, who's going to come along in the second half of this season. Jones isn't a player who I see having a huge impact to this Bills roster. So with him making a good bit of money, might as well end up being a cap casualty, as the regular season rolls around, and him not being featured all too much. I mean, you also have other depth pieces like you drafted Deon Walker in the 4th round, and what about some guys that I have mocked up at the edge here who can move along to the inside? Michael Hecht is a player who I know could play in the 3 tech. Dwayne Carter is a player you drafted very recently as well. So DaQuan Jones, 33 years old, he just might be on the chopping block at this point as Ed Oliver kind of becomes the bigger veteran presence and mentor along that interior of Buffalo's defensive line. But who knows? We'll see. He was a starter last year and could potentially see his spot back, as he hasn't been cut yet at this point. What about Dane Jackson at the cornerback spot? I know this is interesting because Buffalo signed him in free agency this offseason, but to be honest with you guys, I don't think that means all that much. Yes, he was in Buffalo 2 seasons ago and was a featured player in the secondary back then, but he's 28 years old now. Really hasn't produced in a couple of seasons at this point, so I'm not so sure that he's going to be, valued highly along the depth chart, and the Bills could save, over $1 million by cutting him before the start of the season. And like I said, since 2022 where he had 12 PBUs, like this guy hasn't been somebody who you want starting or even as your CB3 or CB4 in a lot of sets. So I'm not all the way in on keeping Dane Jackson. Just 2 weeks ago, this guy was the starter at the outside cornerback spot, and now you have Maxwell Harrison, who you draft at 28, who gets a mentor in Tre'Davious White, who the Bills signed a couple weeks ago, who kind of makes Dane Jackson expendable, in my opinion. Where is he going to see a lot of action? I think he is good enough to be out there on the football field for an NFL team. I just don't know how often it's going to be in Buffalo. And with the production and the kind of reinforcements that they have at the position now at this point, I'm not so sure Jackson's going to be a member of the Bills when the regular season rolls around. And I'm probably even more confident that Laviska Shenault will not be a member of the Bills when the regular season gets here because, to be honest with you guys, he's just not that good of a player. I don't think he's going to see time in the Bills receiver room. They just went out and signed Elijah Moore, and they kind of have their kick return, punt return specialists set up at this point with Codrington, the cornerback, going to be receiving kicks back there. So I'm not so sure that Shenault is going to end up being a guy for Buffalo, especially after they just made another investment at the position yesterday, signing Elijah Moore and signing Josh Palmer in free agency as well. He gave him $12 million. So at best, I don't see Shenault making it above Curtis Samuel in the depth chart. So he's at best a wide receiver 6. The Bills will probably end up keeping 6 receivers on this team. So he's going to be battling for a roster spot when things come around in training camp. What about one of these UDFAs? Because the Bills bring in 3 this season, making an impact in the summer, and seeing Shenault, who really hasn't put up much production at all since the second year he was in the league back in 2021, really a value piece for Buffalo. Somebody who is more worth taking a swing on than a UDFA who is unproven and shown you a lot of effort in camp. Yeah, he can provide in the kick return, punt return department, but he was also kind of shaky back there last season. He had a couple of fumbles that ended up getting him cut from the Seahawks in 2024. I know he did have a kick return touchdown last year, and he can be dynamic with the ball in his hands, but ball security is job security, especially when you're back there returning punts and kicks and your roster spot is replaceable. You can't afford to be making those types of mistakes, and I'm not so sure that Shenault is going to be in a spot where he's on an NFL roster when the fall rolls around, especially not a roster that I think is going to be as good as Buffalo's. But with that being said, who's got to go? As we have 2 more players to talk about on the surprise cut candidates in this video. Name a player that the Bills should cut. Could be a player we've talked about already, but it could be somebody that we haven't talked about. Let me know who you guys think should go down in the comments. Next up, Baylon Specter, and this is a guy who is, at this point, not pegged to be the starter if Matt Milano can be healthy for an entire season. And another reason for Specter being on this list is that he can't necessarily stay healthy for a season. In his 3 years in the NFL, he hasn't played more than 11 games. So for somebody who they invested a day 2 draft pick in a couple of seasons ago, it doesn't seem like he is becoming the player that they need him to be. Yeah, he was respectable last season with 40 tackles. He got a sack and a half. And, he was getting behind the line of scrimmage a little bit. But I don't know if Milano is able to get out there and be healthy for the last year of his contract, where he's really, giving it his all, the kind of contract year where he could potentially get paid for the last time next offseason. I don't see Baylon Specter seeing that much time. And they have good depth at the position as well. They have a Dorian Williams back there. They have a Joe Andreessen who continuously got better as the season got on. The kid from Lancaster, man, remember the name. He is going to be a featured player in this linebacker room for Buffalo in 2025. And I think Baylon Specter is expendable at this point. Olufoshio also had extensive work in the special teams game last year, and he showed flashes and got better as the season went on. This is a deep off-ball linebacker room, and I think Specter might end up being the odd man out. Could be a casualty for Buffalo, as he could be cut, and the Bills could save over $1 million. Don't see him necessarily making too much of an impact next year on the Bills defense, but who knows? They could end up keeping all these guys at the inside linebacker spot. We'll round things out with the most surprising name on this list, and that's AJ Epenesa. And do I think that he could be cut? Probably not, but I had to get a fifth notable name on this list. What about trading AJ Epenesa? Because I do think that you can get solid return back for him, and you might be asking, why didn't you trade him before the draft? Well, maybe you just couldn't find a deal. Maybe you think that he was going to be an impact player on the Bills' edge, defensive chart this year. Well, you go out there and draft Dane Jackson at round 3, a guy who slips down to you in that spot. You get a great value on. I think he's going to play above AJ Epenesa for the Bills this season. I know, Epenesa's solid as a rotational defensive end, but he's a second-round pick you picked 5 years ago at this point. And you gave him an extension last season. He's making $7 million this year and really hasn't evolved as a player all too much. Yeah, as he got more burn in 2024, he was able to rack up more tackles, but the sacks and the pressures at the quarterback were not there. As far as his tackles for loss go, he's not a player in the run game. Yeah, he can get his nose to the football a little bit, but at the end of the day, the production hasn't been there like you've wished for with AJ Epenesa. And with the Bills' defensive line now, which in my opinion could be a strength, maybe AJ Epenesa ends up being a trade candidate when the deadline comes around in the fall. But I know that Joey Bosa is going to play above him as long as he's healthy. I know Greg Rousseau is going to be playing above him. I know once Michael Hecht gets into the lineup in the middle of the season, he is going to be playing above him. Javon Solomon, he showed a lot of flashes last year. Dane Jackson, who taken the 3rd round this season, I think could potentially already be better than AJ Epenesa. So, again, a name who's expendable, probably not somebody who I would expect to be cut by the Bills, but definitely a trade candidate when this, as the season gets closer to coming around. I don't necessarily see him in the Bills' long-term future here, as he hasn't really gotten better over the last few seasons, in my opinion. But with that being said, here are the 5 Bills candidates that could be cut this offseason. Out of these 5, which one would you say is the most likely to be cut? If it's DaQuan Jones, give me a DJ. If it's a Dane Jackson, give me a Dane. If it's a Laviska Shenault, give me an LS. If it's a Baylon Specter, give me a BS. And if it's an AJ Epenesa, give me an AE. Let me know what you guys think is the most likely cut candidate down in the comment section. And make sure you are subscribed to the channel, youtube.com/Bills News, for the best Bills content on YouTube. Lock us in as your #1 source. We'll see you guys all in the next one. And as always, go Bills.